This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and this is the most popular Scotch whiskey in Scotland, the Famous Grouse. It is a blended Scotch that comes at a bargain price. But is it any good? My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. So if you're in the UK, you definitely know this bottle, and it's not like it's rare here in the US. We've got a very, very widely distributed 40% ABV, non-age statement, blended Scotch whiskey here. It's said to be aged in both sherry and bourbon casks. The label talks about selectively aged in sherry seasoned casks. It is the most popular whiskey, again, in Scotland, here in the US. Not quite as common as Johnny Walker. It's not in every bar. It is in most shops. So Johnny Walker kind of occupies this space between the red and the black label. And that's the level we're at here with this whiskey. Very reasonably priced, $25 bottle. It puts you on the level of the Johnny Walker Red and the Dewar's White Label, the non-age statement blended Scotch whiskeys. So what do we know about the whiskeys that go into this blend? Very, very little, right? We don't know anything. All we know is that this is an Edrington blend. And what are the single malts that Edrington owns? They're pretty well known. Highland Park, Macallan, Glenrothes. They used to own Glentarget. They sold that years ago. We don't know where the grain whiskey that's coming into this blend. I'm sure there's plenty of it. We don't know exactly what whiskeys or what ratios. There is not that level of transparency here in these types of blended whiskeys. So I have my pour in front of me here in the Glencairn, as I always do, but that's not really what this whiskey was intended for. It wasn't meant to be poured in a Glencairn and nosed and picked apart for all of the different flavor notes. It was meant to be mixed, right? Poured on the rocks, or here is a nice Scotch and soda highball on the rocks. You can see how nice and cool and refreshing it is. It's summer in my hemisphere under the lights. You can see its condensation on the glass. It's nice. It's cool. It's refreshing. That's a nice sort of option at the end of a warm summer day and watch a game, what have you. It's also a good option to have in your bar, either this or its sort of competitors, to have in a cocktail, right? A Rob Roy or a Paper Plane or a penicillin, whatever. Scotch whiskey cocktails. That is the purpose. That is what this whiskey is made and intended for, and that is what this whiskey is priced for. But nevertheless, we're going to go ahead and go through and pick apart the notes on this blended Scotch whiskey. Going in on the nose on the Famous Grouse, it's pretty rich for what I'm anticipating here with this whiskey. And the richness comes in the form of sweetness. Sweet, rich butterscotch and sherry. There is definitely sherry influence here. It has the sherry spice. It has the orange citrus. There's almost a char quality to it, offsetting the sweetness. Now we go in on the palate with the Famous Grouse neat. Okay, so the palate and the finish are two different things on this whiskey. Let's talk about the palate. When it's on my palate, I can appreciate why this whiskey is so popular. It's a little thin, being a sort of non-Asian blended Scotch, and there's not much of a mouthfeel at 40%, chill filtered, but there's a richness. There is a rich sweetness. It's a honey sweet. That sherry's definitely there. Cinnamon, that orange citrus follows through, and there's something that's almost a ghost, an echo, very subtle, but an ashiness, probably from whatever peated whiskey was in this blend. So let's go back on the palate, on the finish, so I can explain what I was saying earlier. Starts out butterscotch candy, those little hard candies. That sweetness follows through. It's a short finish, but it leaves an aftertaste. So the finish really isn't still going, but your tongue is still sort of coated, the sort of aftershocks of the sweetness. But there is a bitter from the casks, And there is a real earthiness here. Something a little bit damp, a little bit, green maybe. It's not really peaty, but it's Dunnage Warehouse. It's something Scotch. It's a finish that I don't think everybody loves. It's not like I have a tremendous amount of sort of familiarity with how everybody reacts to this whiskey, but from what I've seen, what I've heard, some people feel like the finish doesn't match the first two levels that are sweet, and it's kind of not, their favorite part of the experience. But with those sort of flavor elements, with that cask element, a lot of times those blended scotches on the finish just vanish. When I did my blind tasting tournament in March, my Malt Madness tournament, the blended scotches really struggled to keep up, and it was the finish. The finish kind of falls off a table and just doesn't really stay with you, so they couldn't kind of stand up to some of the more robust single malts that were in those blind flights. But here we have something to hold on to, and again, this is a whiskey that is almost always going to be added to something. Water, rocks, mixers, cocktails. And so I can understand why people reach for this. It's bringing something. It's bringing something more than just the sweetness. It has a little dimension to it. It's giving it a little bit of presence, right? This is not the same category of whiskey that we have a lot of ratings for sort of scale on the channel. I think of this sort of category, the Johnnie Walker Reds, the Dewar's White Labels, as being the sort of baseline of the sort of rating structure. That's the sort of one glass range. Is this whiskey enough? Does it have enough to get any additional rating to exceed that? I'm just going to tell you, it's not going to happen on value. This is a whiskey that costs what these sort of types of whiskeys cost, $25, and that's going to buy you, Johnnie Walker Red and Dewar's White Label for less than $30. You can graduate to the age statement blends, the Johnnie Walker Blacks, the Dewar's 12-year, and the like. And so it's not overpriced, but it's not a bargain relative to its competitors. This presented very well when I mixed it with soda, and it has a pretty solid richness. I would say 1 1/4 glasses. Give it a little tip of the hat to the Famous Grouse for going just that little bit more. And maybe it's not fair to rate this blended scotch on the same scale that we rate the single malts. I think Ralphie has separate scales, and if I end up doing more of these, maybe I'll do a little subcategory, break them out so we have scores a little bit more relative to the competition. Because when we put this up again against a single malt, when you go from one to the other, especially when you have that finish, it really tells you you're dealing with something that is different. And speaking of finish, I'm finished here. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe. You press this big button right over here so you don't miss the next video. I will see you on the next one.